Hi, my name is Didier. Welcome to the Golden Promise Whiskey Bar. Usually we are at the lab at La Maison du Whisky, but because the bars are reopening in France today, we decided to come over here and talk about ordering cocktails. So let's get to it. Okay, so usually when you get into a bar, you're going to have a cocktail menu. So this is obviously where they're going to list their different cocktails. And it's always fun when you're discovering a new bar to try their original cocktails, because this kind of gives you their spin on cocktail making and their identity. So feel free to order from the menu. But of course, you can always order classics, which all bartenders know how to make. So if you've got a favorite that you like, feel free to order those as well. So then, what kind of drinks do we have? Basically, you might see these in the menu, and most bartenders know what it means, but it might not be obvious to everyone. But a long drink, for example, is a type of drink which is going to be served in a glass like this, a tall glass. And so this is going to be usually a spirit with a mixer. In its simplest form, we call this a highball. Now, you might know this like as a gin tonic, whiskey coke. It could be a rum and ginger ale, for example. And actually, those have their own special name, the mule. So if you have a drink with a spirit and a ginger beer, this is usually going to be called a mule. So if you see a cocktail name with mule in it, expect ginger beer. And then they can be more, complex as well with lemon, sugar, and other ingredients. But a long drink basically is going to be something tall, quite diluted, and refreshing. Then you've got the short drinks on the other hand. Short drinks are going to be served in these types of glasses, which are going to be shorter, obviously, but containing less liquid. The drinks are going to be less diluted. So either something like this, which looks like a rocks glass, usually with ice in it, or a cocktail served up. What we call up means usually in a coupette or a martini glass, for example, and usually without ice. So these are stronger drinks. These are going to be boozier, heavier in alcohol. They're just two different styles. So remember this: long drinks or short drinks. Okay, so now that we've talked about the type of drinks, the families, you've also got the sours. The sours are going to be drinks, usually short drinks, that have some kind of citrus, usually lemon or lime, with some sugar or some other sweetener, and a base spirit. Some famous sours, well, there's the whiskey sour, which has the name in it, which has the sour in the name itself. But you've also got like the margarita, for example. You've got the daiquiri, which is the most famous probably. So these kind of fall under the sour category. So if you see sour in the description or in the name, expect something with lemon or lime and some sugar to balance it out. You've also got some classics that you can order in any bar, like the Old Fashioned. The Old Fashioned is going to be easy. It's just basically a sweetener like sugar, some cocktail bitters. We talked about cocktail bitters in another episode, so you can go back and look at that. But basically, it's just a couple drops of some very concentrated aromatic spirit. It doesn't mean the cocktail is going to be bitter itself, because there's so little in it. So if you see bitters, don't freak out. It could mean just a little bit of aroma. And then you've got your base spirit, and that's going to be an Old Fashioned. You've got the Manhattan, for example, which is whiskey, usually rye, with a vermouth, a red vermouth. And there's a whole bunch of classic cocktails like this. There's another one you have to be careful if you're ordering in France, especially. The dry martini, because if you order just a martini in a regular bar, you might just get the sweet vermouth, because martini is a brand as well, and they do make some sweet white vermouth. So be careful. Make sure you specify a dry martini cocktail with gin or vodka, so that you get what you're expecting. Okay, and so now that we've seen the classics, a word you might see actually or hear a bartender use is the word twist. So twist, it doesn't mean a lemon twist, right? Because that's something that you can see in a bar as well. Usually if they're saying that a cocktail is a twist of a Manhattan, for example, a twist of another cocktail, it means that they've swapped out maybe one of the ingredients or added an ingredient or two of their own, so that it's basically using a base of a classic cocktail, but just slightly adapting it. And so they call that a twist of a classic cocktail. And actually most of the cocktails on menus that you see, they're twists of classics. It's hard to come up with a completely new cocktail. And then some of these twists actually become classics themselves with time. So for example, the Manhattan is a classic. If you swap out if you use some maraschino liqueur and some picon amer, then you've got what's called a Brooklyn cocktail. For another twist would be the gin basil smash, for example, which has become very common. Basically, they took a smash, a bourbon smash, which is used in mint, and they swapped the mint for basil and used gin instead of whiskey, and now you've got a gin basil smash. So these twists can become themselves classic, which is quite interesting. And bartenders can create their own twists as well. Okay, now what about which cocktail you should order at which time of the day or night? Basically, if you're ordering before a meal, you don't want something too boozy, too heavy. So you're probably going to go for either a long drink, something light, diluted and bubbly, so that you're not overwhelming your palate before your meal. Or you can also go the Italian route. A lot of these Italian cocktails, like the Negroni, the Americano, a Spritz, for example, these are perfect pre-meal drinks because they're going to have that bitterness. Usually red cocktails that are quite bitter, and it's going to kind of, wake up your palates and get yourself ready for your meal. So the Italian route's a good one to go as well. Now, if you're coming off of a meal and you're looking for more of a digestif end of the meal cocktail, that's when we're going to go more for short drinks that are a bit boozier, a bit more powerful, more spirit forward. And this is a perfect time for an old fashioned, for example. You're probably going to go for some darker spirits like a whiskey, cognac, or an aged rum, for example. But yeah, these are going to be the shorter drinks that you're ordering after a meal, or during the course of the night. And then there's also what we call a nightcap, which is at the end of the night. It comes at the very end, the last cocktail before going home. And these usually tend to be a bit sweeter. Think of it kind of like a dessert, with liqueurs, for example. Okay, great. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. Follow us for more. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. And we've got a question for you too, actually, to see if to test your knowledge. There is an ingredient that's popping up on menus more and more in sour cocktails, actually, that wasn't common before. But let's see if you know what it is. Verjus, Verjus. So verjus is a new ingredient that we're seeing more and more in cocktails. Do you know what it is? If you think you know, put it in the comments. And we'll see you next time.